Thank you very much, Lord Hacking, for that speech. So now we move to our second round of paper speakers. So speaking second in proposition tonight is Ms. Kezia Dugdale. Kezia is a Professor of Practice at the University of Glasgow and Associate Director for the Centre of Public Policy. Before joining the University of Glasgow, Kezia was a member of the Scottish Parliament for the Lothian regions for 8 years, during which she led the Scottish Labour Party through 4 national elections and the EU referendum. Beyond her working life, she is on the board of the housing charity Shelter UK, the Electoral Reform Society, and the Oversight Board of The Promise, an organisation driving change for care-experienced young people in Scotland. Ms. Dugdale, you have the floor.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, Madam President. Thank you so much for the most generous hospitality and the kindest welcome I've had since I arrived in Cambridge around lunchtime today. I actually left Scotland this morning and everything was fine. And by the time my plane had landed, the government had collapsed. So I think I might stay, if that's okay. I've got some very nice accommodation in Westcourt, and I think I might make it more of a permanent home. It is a huge privilege for me to take part in tonight's debate, not least to follow my colleague and citizen of the United Kingdom, Darren Hughes, who is, of course, a lead expert in House of Lords and democratic reform more generally. I rise in favour of the motion to scrap the House of Lords, and I do so rooted in that being phase 1 of a plan to rewire Britain itself. The case I will make to you tonight is an unanswerable case for the need for political and democratic reform, and I will get to that in a second, but I'd like to take a moment or two to start with a reflection of the state that we are in. My job prior to working at the Centre for Public Policy at Glasgow University was to direct the John Smith Centre, named after a former Labour leader, exists to make the positive case for politics and public service. And we study the relationship between the public and their politicians. We study political trust, the degree to which we trust our politicians. And it will not surprise you to know that we're at a real low ebb at the moment. It's the lowest it's been, in fact, since records began in the 1930s, and it's falling currently at the moment. It took a significant dip after the economic crash in 2008, and it's falling again significantly since Brexit. But what's new about our current state is not only is it low, but it's unequal, with increasing levels of distrust from women, from people on low incomes, and from people from non-traditional backgrounds, particularly young people from non-traditional backgrounds. So if you look at the intersectionality of that and picture in your minds a young single mum in a working-class council estate working 3 jobs, she is about as far removed from the political system as you possibly can be. Yet she is perhaps the most in need of a government that will act in her interests. And that is why political trust in our political systems matters. We saw that most acutely during COVID, where our government told us what to do. We had to listen to them, and our attitudes towards them drove our behaviour. That was a small insight into what the future holds. My argument to you is the future actually looks incredibly bleak. If you start to think about the demographic time bomb that we're facing, the reality that that will have for our public services in terms of the income tax and the revenues that we'll need to sustain public services as they are now, let alone what they'll be like when 1/3 of our population are of pensionable age, when we think about the challenges that climate change will bring and the decisions that we'll have to take as citizens in response to that, and indeed a technological revolution, our government will decide many aspects of our life, and our relationship with them will determine the future of our country. Political trust matters, and we have a crisis in political trust. The House of Lords is where we must start, but start we must. My platform for political reform means that every vote must count. So I support my colleague Darren Hughes in making the case for proportional representation. There must be further devolution across the United Kingdom, including addressing the democratic deficit that exists in England itself. And we must scrap the House of Lords, but replace it with a revised, elected second chamber. Sure. So I welcome that point, and I would point the member to the evidence for this. So when you're in the political bubble and you see a political scandal break, like, for example, Partygate and Boris Johnson, it's very easy to think that that's a bad bit of news for your opponents. But all the academic evidence actually tells us the public view that as a plague on all of their houses. They don't differentiate between political parties. Likewise, they don't differentiate between political chambers, whether that be the House of Commons or the House of Lords. And I would say to my colleague on the floor that I'm afraid, as much respect as I have for members of the House of Lords opposite, there is nothing more archetypically out of touch than a peer dressed in ermine, taking £300 a day to offer their expertise with little to no effect on the ultimate legislation that is materialised from a consequence of the process. I'm going to develop my point a little more, sir, if you don't mind, because I want to address another point that we had from the floor earlier with regards to what I thought was an incredibly important and eloquent speech this week from Natalie Bennett. And I listened to it on my journey down, and I thought of it again when I listened very intently to Baroness Jones' speech earlier, a speech about Rwanda, and I want to quote from it, because she said that the House of Lords is not without moral or legal responsibility. I was really struck by that. She then went on to say, as the gentleman said, if not now, when? What will it take for this House to say, here we take a stand? Well, I'll answer that question for her. What it will take is democratic elections. That is the difference. That is why we have to elect our Lords. And it's precisely because that they are unelected that they have no real power. In fact, there is one power that hasn't been mentioned tonight. The House of Lords actually has the power to increase the length of the House of Commons parliamentary term. Let's all hope and pray they do not use that at any immediate point. I'm very sorry to the Baroness, but I think the point she's just made means that they have even fewer powers than I was giving them credit for.
But it would be much more dangerous what you were suggesting.
I have the most sincere, genuine respect for members of the House of Lords, but when I look upon it, and I have done for over a decade now, I really see two core functions that it has. One is, and we've heard this point from the floor tonight already, is that it is a delaying mechanism. It is not a block, and if it is a block, ask yourself, when did it last use it? And if it didn't use it recently, why on earth did it not use it in this past week? So it is nothing but a delaying mechanism. It plays for time. It's the slow-mo function on your phone. It's the VAR of politics that breaks the pace of play and nothing more. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to make more progress, sir. I've taken a couple of interventions. Secondly...
Turn me down twice.
Oh, go on then. Go on.
This is right.
I bow before your power, my lord.
He's got the right to speak as long as he wants. Point of information. Chief Whip.
And I think we're all delighted that you did. But my point is merely all you did was delay the inevitable. You didn't stop that particular piece of legislation passing. Now, we have all thought for a long time that the House of Lords is considered, and I'm grateful to the honourable member for making this point for me, so I'll know it's not impolite now, it is viewed as a retirement home for politicians, people who leave elected office. But it also has a new role now, almost as a holding pen for malcontents and political problems. And I think that particular aspect of its character is now redundant, because we've got GB News for that. I jest, perhaps unfairly. I have a genuine, deepest respect for many members of the House of Lords, for their experience and their expertise. I just wish it counted for something. And that is the argument that I'm putting forward today. What worth is that when such expertise and experience is routinely ignored? It is not enough to be right. Look at the reality of what the Lords does. It is not enough for the women and children currently crossing the Channel in small boats. It is not enough to be right for the hundreds of thousands of people who have been disenfranchised from voting, for those who have lost their right to protest because of recent UK government legislation. I hope very much there will be a Labour government, and I hope and suspect that in the early days of that Labour government, that Keir Starmer will appoint a huge tranche of new peers. He will have to do that to get rid of that delay mechanism that we have described today. But I hope every one of those many new peers goes down to London, not to settle down or to settle in, but to settle up and to commit themselves to reforming the House of Lords as a political institution that's fit for the future. It will be hard. I've heard Baroness Hayman describe or quote Peter Hennessy as saying that Lord's Reform is the Bermuda Triangle of political debate. You enter it and you're never seen again. But the bigger the majority Labour have at this election, the bigger responsibility they carry to do the serious business of House of Lords reform, and I thoroughly look forward to it. Thank you very much.